Football stadiums have come a long way throughout the decades. There's no doubt that the fan and player experience has vastly improved, be it through larger scoreboards, climate-controlled facilities, or better playing surfaces. Though sometimes, stadiums get built at the wrong time or in the wrong era, whether it's due to it being built just before vast improvements are made in design and technology, or it just being built in an in-between era of stadium construction. There's quite a bit of buyer's remorse with these facilities, as if they were just built just a little bit later, they could have been vastly different and vastly better. These are the football stadiums that were built at the wrong time. First off, we have Bank of America Stadium, which opened as Ericsson Stadium in 1996 as the home of the Carolina Panthers. This stadium would be relatively decent and better than many of the stadiums that existed at the time that it was built, as many stadiums existing in 1996 were still the terrible multi-purpose stadiums. However, in just the 7 years after this stadium opened, 13 new stadiums were built for other teams in the NFL. 11 of them would be outdoors, and almost all of them would be better than this one, whether it was due to better design, intricacy, or features. And this would only become even more obvious as more venues would open through today. While modern for its era, it was a very basic design for a stadium, with just a solid enclosed bowl wrapping around the entire field. While hundreds of millions of dollars are planned to be spent to renovate this stadium, this is merely just a stopgap measure, as ownership is already openly stating they plan to pursue a new stadium in just 13 years' time. Ultimately, there really isn't enough that can be done to make this stadium be used indefinitely without plans for a replacement, as even with renovations, it will likely be vastly inferior to most other NFL venues. Next we have the Alamo Dome, which opened in 1993. This stadium was built during a time when domes were only built out of necessity, and given San Antonio's high heat, that would be necessary. Unfortunately, due to the limitations of the time, the dome was built with basically no features that made it a compelling indoor venue. The goal was that it would get an NFL team, however it never did. It served as the home of the Spurs for a time, but it was just too big to be a permanent NBA venue. And while it has hosted the NCAA Final Four 4 times, and soon a 5th time, it is now being considered that it is too old to host another one in the long-term future. Had this stadium been built perhaps 10 years later, when retractable roofs in the NFL became a thing, and indoor football stadiums started to look much nicer, this stadium could have perhaps gotten an NFL team. However, given how old it is, and what little you can actually do with it, outside of having to almost completely rebuild the stadium, it's probably going to become more and more limited as far as its ability to host big events. And next we have Northwest Stadium, much better known as FedEx Field. This stadium would open in 1997 for the Washington Redskins, now Washington Commanders, and when it originally opened as Jack Kent Cooke Stadium, the focus would be on capacity, as it would seat over 80,000 people due to the fact that the Redskins at the time had been quite good over the previous decade and a half, winning 3 Super Bowls. The stadium, while already large by NFL standards, was expanded to over 90,000 in the early 2000s. However, throughout the early 2010s, capacity would be reduced by over 25,000, resulting in the stadium looking like an ugly shell of its former self. Ultimately, this stadium was built just before many other superior NFL venues were built in subsequent years. However, another issue with the timing of this stadium is that it would open just after the Redskins' longtime owner Jack Kent Cooke would pass away, opening a new era of ownership that would be quite unsuccessful. Under owner Dan Snyder, the team would struggle and attendance would drop, and FedEx Field, already having a fairly basic design and being built for capacity, would become obsolete fairly quickly, and it is expected that it will end its tenure as a venue after only a 33-year run. Next we have what is best known as the Edwardjonesdome, which opened in 1995. This stadium was built without a commitment from an NFL team to play there. It would get a moved team in the form of the Los Angeles Rams in 1995, though probably would have been served better as an outdoor stadium given the period that it was built, as a rather generic-looking appearance both inside and outside, combined with a lack of amenities such as a retractable roof or natural light, would make it age quickly and make it so that the Rams would be able to break their lease after just 20 years. Though it was built during a time when domes were pretty much only built out of necessity, St. Louis opted for one anyway, even though it wasn't that necessary, given the climate of the area. Many newer and better stadiums would come quickly after, and this one would be forgotten as a memorable venue. And finally, we have New Soldier Field, which essentially was just a completely rebuilt stadium. This stadium was being built right when the better indoor stadiums began to open in 2002 with Ford Field and Reliant Stadium. And not too long after the new version opened in 2003, you also had Arizona, Indianapolis, and Dallas all get brand new dome stadiums that were considered very nice. However, Soldier Field was built during a time where it was much more commonplace to build an outdoor stadium, as 11 out of the 13 NFL stadiums built before it were outdoors. Once all the newer and nicer stadiums were opening just before and after this stadium opened up and began hosting Super Bowls, showing strong proof of concept for indoor stadiums, it seemed like a mega market like Chicago got shortchanged with this stadium, and it appears that the team wants to move on from it even before its first lease is up. Built just before domes became commonplace and much better, especially in large markets, the buyer's remorse left from this stadium will likely mean that it doesn't last much longer. A lot goes into these stadiums, and the planning process begins far in advance of their opening date, and sometimes they just become a victim of the era that they were built and what was available, which oftentimes leads to stadiums being forgettable or relatively short-tenured venues. Thank you for watching.